When I retired, I invited my family to celebrate. No one came. That same evening, I found my house locked, with a new key I didn't own. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this truth travels. I always believed retirement would be a moment of joy. A new chapter. A chance to sit back, smile at what I had built, and share it with the people I loved most. For 30 years, I worked as a nurse at the county hospital. Long nights on my feet, endless alarms, crying newborns, and patients who needed someone to hold their hand through the pain. Gave them everything. And when my shift ended, I always hurried home to make sure my son had dinner on the table and a warm place to sleep. So when my last day finally came, I thought my family would be proud. I spent all week preparing. I made grocery lists, picked fresh daisies from my garden, set the table with the china I only used for special occasions. 8. Place settings, one for each of them. My son, his wife, their 2 kids, my sister Ruth, her husband Carl, and of course me, sitting at the head of the table where I could see everyone's faces. I even baked a lemon pound cake, the recipe my late husband, Frank, always requested on his birthday. I wore the pale yellow dress he once said made me glow, and when I looked in the mirror that evening, I whispered to myself, "Margaret, you did it. You made it to the finish line. Now you'll finally rest, surrounded by family." By 6 p.m., the house was quiet. The candles burned softly. The roast sat in the oven, perfectly timed. I checked the clock, then my phone. No calls, no messages. Maybe they hit traffic. Maybe the kids were dragging their feet. That's what I told myself, as ow. I smoothed the tablecloth for the 3rd time. At 6:30, I dialed my son, straight to voicemail. Then I tried my daughter-in-law. No answer. Even Ruth didn't pick up, and she always answered by the 2nd ring. I set my phone down. The dining room felt too big, the ticking clock too loud. By 7 p.m., I knew they weren't coming. The roast was cooling. The candles had melted to stubs. I sat down heavily at the head of the table, 8 empty chairs staring back at me like an accusation. I told myself not to cry. I told myself there had to be a reason. But deep down, I felt something shift. A crack inside my chest, like ice breaking on a lake when the temperature drops too fast. Still, I held on to one last thread of hope. I opened my laptop, maybe a message, maybe some explanation. Instead, the first thing on my screen was a photo. My family, all of them, sitting at a long table in a restaurant. Wine glasses raised, smiles so wide they hurt to look at. The caption read, "Celebrating new beginnings with family." I stared until my eyes burned. They were all there, my son, his wife, the kids, even Ruth and Carl, everyone except me. The candles flickered out. The house fell into silence, and in that silence, a thought began to take shape. Maybe this wasn't an accident. Maybe it was never about traffic or timing or mix-ups. Maybe they had been planning this all along. My phone buzzed. A message from my son. "Sorry, Mom. We ended up out tonight. Hope you had a good evening." Just that. No mention of the dinner. No mention of the table I had set. No mention of me. I looked around the room. The untouched plates. The cold roast. The untouched cake I'd spent all morning making. And for the first time in 67 years, I felt invisible. Not just forgotten. Erased. That night, I blew out the candles, packed the food away, and sat at the kitchen table, hands shaking around a cup of cold tea. The house that once felt warm suddenly seemed like a stranger's, and I couldn't stop asking myself if I no longer had a place at my own table, then where did I belong? I didn't sleep that night. The silence in my house was louder than any alarm clock I had ever heard at the hospital. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every laugh from that restaurant photo, every glass raised, every smile, and the empty chair that should have been mine. By morning, the anger had cooled into something heavier, not rage, not even sadness. It was a question. When had I stopped belonging to the very family I raised? I walked into the dining room. The plates were still on the table, stacked neatly after I put them away. The lemon pound cake sat untouched in the fridge, its sweetness now bitter. Every time I opened the door, I pressed my hand against the wood of the dining chair. The same chair where my son used to sit with his feet dangling, swinging back and forth as he told me about his day. When had those feet stopped swinging toward me and started walking away? I tried calling him again. This time he answered. "Mom, I'm busy," he said quickly, the clinking of dishes in the background. Busy. The word cut sharper than a knife. I wanted to ask, busy celebrating without me? But my throat locked up. Instead, I just whispered, "I thought you were coming last night." There was a pause, a shuffle, then his voice, flat. "Things changed. We'll talk later." And the line went dead. I stood frozen. The phone still pressed to my ear. Things changed. That was all. 30 years of night shifts, missed holidays. Every scraped knee I patched, every fever I soothed, reduced to 2 words. The days that followed felt strange. The house grew quieter. My phone stayed silent, but something inside me stirred. A suspicion, a whisper. Maybe their absence wasn't just thoughtless. Maybe it was deliberate. I thought back to little moments. Christmas 2 years ago, when my daughter-in-law insisted they'd be too busy to stop by. Later, I found photos off their big Christmas party, neighbors and friends all invited, or Emma's school recital, the one I was told had been canceled. But on social media, there she was, twirling in her ballet dress, surrounded by applause. I hadn't missed those events. I had been erased from them. One afternoon, I walked into the garden. Frank's roses were in bloom, soft pink petals brushing my fingertips. I remembered how he used to say, "These roses will keep you company, even when I'm gone." For years they had, but now even the roses felt like witnesses to something I didn't yet understand. That evening, I decided to look deeper. I pulled out an old box of papers from the hall closet, Frank's will, the deed to the house. Bank records we kept together. As I spread them across the table, a cold realization hit me. My son had asked about these papers once, casually. "Oh, Mom, maybe it's time to organize all this for the future." At the time, I thought it was concern. Now, I wasn't so sure. I stayed up late reading line after line, trying to understand what exactly was mine and what they might be after. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every gust of wind at the window felt like a warning. But I kept reading, because for the first time I realized love might not be the only thing my family wanted from me. The next morning, a knock rattled the door. I hurried over, relieved, thinking maybe my son had come to apologize. But when I turned the knob, the door wouldn't open. I pulled harder, still stuck, and then I saw it. The lock. Shiny. New. Different. My heart dropped. I fumbled through my keys, each one sliding uselessly against the metal. None of them fit. I knocked harder. "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer. Just the sound of birds outside, mocking my desperation. I sat down on the front step, the concrete cold beneath me. My hands trembled as I gripped my useless keyring. This was my house. The home where I raised my son. The garden Frank had planted, the walls covered with family photos, and yet, in one silent twist of metal, I had been locked out. A shadow moved behind the curtain. For a moment, I thought I imagined it. But then, the door opened. My son stood there, avoiding my eyes, and behind him, my daughter-in-law's voice cut through. Tell her, David. She needs to hear it. He cleared his throat. Mom, you can't stay here anymore. The words slammed into me harder than any fall I had ever taken. I opened my mouth to protest, but before I could, she stepped forward, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp. This house isn't yours, Margaret. It's ours now. You need to accept that. The door closed, and for the first time in my life I realized I wasn't just forgotten. I was being replaced. The words echoed in my ears. This house isn't yours. It's ours now. I stood frozen, the sunlight behind me casting a long shadow on the porch. For years, I believed this house was safety. Now it was a battleground. I tried to steady my voice. This home, your father and I built it. Every room holds our life. My son shifted uneasily. His eyes flicked to the floor, but before he could answer, she stepped forward, confident, sharp. You signed the papers, Margaret. Don't you remember? The deed is in our name now. I blinked hard. What papers? She smiled, pulling a folder from behind the door. Inside, photocopies of documents, lines of legal text, and at the bottom, my name, or rather, something that looked like my name, my stomach. Twisted. The letters looped wrong. The signature was shaky, as if traced by someone's hand pretending to be mine. That's not me, I whispered. I never signed this. She tilted her head. Oh, Margaret, memory slips at your age. Maybe you just forgot. The cruelty in her tone was sharper than any scalpel I had ever seen at the hospital. I turned to my son. David, look at me. Do you believe this? He hesitated, his lips parted, then closed again. I don't know, Mom, he stammered. Maybe you don't remember. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt. My own child, the boy I raised through sleepless nights, the boy who clung to me during thunderstorms, now standing silent, while his wife rewrote the story of my life. Tears blurred my vision. This house? Your father planted roses out back. You learned to ride your bike here. We painted your room blue because you begged for it. How could you believe I'd just give it away? For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. A crack, a memory. But then, she placed a hand on his arm, firm, controlling. Enough, she snapped. She needs to leave. The weight of her words pressed against my chest. Leave, as if I were a guest in the home I had tended for decades. I backed away slowly. My hands trembled around my keys, useless metal that no longer fit the door. The door closed with a final thud. I stood on the porch, alone. That night, I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table of a small motel down the road. The air smelled of stale coffee. The fluorescent light buzzed above me, and in front of Malay the photocopies they had shown me. I stared at the forged signature, each crooked letter like a blade carving into my chest. But beneath the grief, a spark began to burn. For years I cared for strangers in hospital beds. I knew how to keep fighting even when exhausted. I wasn't going to let my family erase me with a pen. The next morning, I gathered every document I could find. Frank's will, old mortgage statements, property tax receipts. I placed them carefully in a folder, my hands steady now. Then I picked up the phone. Martin Reynolds, please, I told the receptionist. Martin Dart, the lawyer who had handled Frank's estate years ago. The one man I trusted to help me make sense of this. An hour later, I sat across from him in his office. The room smelled of old books and fresh ink. He adjusted his glasses, looking over the copies I brought. Then he frowned. Margaret, these signatures aren't yours. They've been forged. The words confirmed what I already knew, but hearing them out loud sent a wave of both relief and fury crashing through me. He leaned closer. Did your son show you these? I nodded slowly. Yes, and he believed them. Martin's jaw tightened. Then, he doesn't understand yet. These aren't legal. The house is still yours. The air left my lungs in a rush. Still mine. The home where Frank and I built our life together, still mine. For a moment, tears stung my eyes again. Not of despair this time, but of defiance. Martin's voice was calm but firm. Margaret, you need to be careful. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. Planned. The word sent chills down my spine. How long had they been working on this? How many dinners had I been excluded from while they whispered about deeds and locks? I clenched, the papers in my hand. If they thought they could steal my home with lies, they didn't know me at all. Because this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. Martin leaned back in his chair. His voice was steady, but his eyes were sharp. Margaret, this is fraud. And if we handle it right, you'll not only keep your home, you'll make sure they never try this again. I nodded slowly. The weight in my chest began to shift. For days, I'd felt like a ghost wandering my own life. But now I felt something else. Strength, determination. That evening, I returned to my motel room. The lemon pound cake still sat in my bag wrapped in foil. I unwrapped it, took one bite. It tasted of defiance. The next morning, I called my son. David, I said, we need to talk, tonight, at the house. He hesitated, but agreed. At 7 p.m., I stood outside the door that once welcomed me home. My hand tightened around my folder. Inside, Martin's statement. The real deed. Proof of the forgery. The door opened. David stood there, eyes weary. Behind him, she hovered, like a shadow, arms crossed, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Mom, what are you doing here? He asked softly. I stepped inside. The air smelled of their dinner, steak, wine, the meal I once cooked for Jaime on his birthdays, but tonight it smelled bitter. I set the folder on the table. You forged my name, I said firmly. David's eyes widened. She laughed lightly. Oh, Margaret, still clinging to your imagination. I slid the page forward. Martin Reynolds. Attorney. He confirmed these signatures are fake. Her smile faltered. David glanced between us. His fingers drummed nervously on the table. Mom, are you sure? Look at it, David, I snapped. Look at the loops in the letters. The crooked line in the M. That's not my hand, it's hers. For the first time, his eyes shifted toward her. She stiffened. Don't let her confuse you. This is your future. Our children's future. She's old. She doesn't need this house anymore. Her words sliced through me, but I didn't flinch. Old or not, I said. This house is mine, and if you try to take it again, you'll lose more than just a home. I pulled out another paper. Frank's will. Signed, stamped, unchanged. It all comes to me first, every wall, every rose in the garden, and the law is still on my side. Silence, the kind that weighs heavy. David's face drained of color. Her jaw tightened. Finally, he whispered. She's telling the truth, isn't she? Her eyes flashed. David, don't. But it was too late. He pushed back from the table, running a hand through his hair. I can't believe this. I trusted you. For once, the control slipped from her grip. She stammered, trying to gather her composure. It was for us. For the kids. Don't you see? She would have wasted everything. I stood taller. For decades, I worked nights, missed Christmas, missed birthdays. I gave you this life, and you call that a waste? David's shoulders slumped. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in years I saw the boy I had raised. The boy who once held my hand when crossing the street. His voice cracked. I'm sorry, Mom. But before I could answer, she slammed her hand on the table. Don't you dare apologize. This was supposed to be ours. We deserve it. Her face twisted with fury. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. She hadn't just erased me from family dinners. She had been trying to erase me from my own life. I gathered the papers, slipped them back into my folder. This isn't the end, I said quietly. I have proof. If you try again, you won't just lose my trust. You'll face the law. I turned, walked to the door. My steps steady, my heart pounding. At the threshold, I paused. David, a lock can keep out a key, but it can't keep out the truth. The night air was cool on my face as I stepped outside. The roses in the garden breathed their sweet scent into the dark, and for the first time in weeks, I felt free. Back at the motel, I sat at the small desk, opened my journal, and wrote 6 words. They cannot erase me. Not yet. The story wasn't over. But for the first time, I was no longer the one waiting. I was the one preparing to fight, preparing to reclaim, preparing to remind them that I was still here. The motel room was silent. Only the hum of the old heater filled the space. I sat at the desk, papers spread before me, the proof, the evidence, and yet my heart was heavy. How had it come to this? A son I once held in my arms, now standing against me, convinced by lies. But Martin's words echoed in my mind. The house is still yours. That truth was my anchor. The next morning, I returned to Martin's office. He was already waiting, coffee steaming on his desk. Margaret, he said, I've prepared the paperwork. If they try to claim your home again, they'll face charges. Forgery, fraud, and the law will not be kind. I swallowed hard. Martin, I don't want to destroy my son. I just want my life back. He nodded. I understand, but sometimes justice feels like destruction to those who thought they'd get away. That evening, I drove back to the house. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across Frank's rose garden. I parked at the curb, watching the windows glow with lamplight. Inside, I could see silhouettes. David pacing, her standing still, arms crossed, just as she always was. I didn't knock this time. I rang the bell. When the door opened, I stood tall, folder in hand. David, I'm giving you one chance, I said. One chance to make this right. He looked exhausted. His eyes ringed with shadows. Mom, I don't know what to believe anymore. I opened the folder, slid the real deed forward. Believe the truth, not her lies. She snatched the papers, scanned them, her face tightening. This doesn't change anything, she hissed. You're old. You don't need a house this big. We deserve it more. Her words cut, but I stood firm. Need doesn't decide ownership. Truth does. And the truth is, this house was never yours to take. For a long moment, the 3 of us stood in silence. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly. The air was thick. Finally, David sank into a chair. His voice was barely above a whisper. She's right. We've gone too far. Her face snapped toward him. What are you doing? Don't you dare side with her. But David only shook his head. She's my mother, and we forged her name. I can't pretend anymore. Tears filled my eyes. Not victory, not yet, but the faintest glimmer of hope that the boy I raised was still somewhere inside this man. Her fury erupted. "You weak fool! You'll throw away everything for her?" She turned to me, eyes blazing. "You'll regret this, Margaret. You'll regret ever standing in my way." I met her glare. "No. The only regret I have is letting you stay in my life this long." I gathered my papers, turned to David. "You have a choice. Stand with her lies. Or stand with the truth." Then I walked out. The night air wrapped around me, cool and steady. The following week, I stayed close to Martin. He filed the legal notices. He made sure my title was protected. And slowly, I began to breathe again. One morning, as I watered Frank's roses, my phone rang. It was David. His voice cracked. "Mom, she left. She took the kids. She said she couldn't live in a house that wasn't ours." Silence stretched. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything." I leaned on the garden fence. The sun warmed my face. Sorry, the word was small, but it was a start. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where my retirement dinner had once been set for 8. Now it was just me, but it no longer felt empty, because it was mine. I placed Frank's photo in the center. His gentle smile seemed to say, "Well done, Margaret, you fought back." And though the scars remained, something inside me lifted. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer erased. I was here, and this home, my life, my dignity, still mine. I closed my eyes, letting the quiet settle. Not the hollow silence of betrayal, but the calm of freedom. And for the first time in weeks, I slept. Truly slept. The question lingered as dawn broke across the roses. If family can betray you this deeply, who do you let back into your heart when the truth finally wins? The house was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Not heavy, not hollow, peaceful. I walked through the hallway, my fingers brushing the frames of old family photos. Frank in his uniform, David as a boy, smiling with missing teeth. Me, in my nurse scrubs, eyes tired but proud. For so long, these walls felt like a prison. Now, they felt like protection. The roses bloomed brighter that summer. I trimmed them every morning, watering them with a steady hand. And each time I whispered to Frank, they tried to take it from us. But we won love. We kept it safe. David came, by sometimes. He stood on the porch, head bowed, words stumbling out. "I'm sorry, Mom, for believing her, for not standing up for you sooner." His apologies were fragile, like paper in the rain. But still I listened. Because no matter the betrayal, he was my son. One evening, he brought Emma and Noah. The children rushed into the living room, their laughter bouncing off the walls. For the first time in months, the house felt alive again. Emma tugged my hand. "Grandma, can we bake that lemon cake? The one Daddy said you make the best?" I smiled. The same recipe that had once sat untouched in the fridge in my retirement night was now asked for with joy. We baked together. Flour dusted across the counter, Emma's giggles, Noah's sticky fingers, and as the cake rose in the oven, I felt something rise in me too. Not erasure, not betrayal, but renewal. That night, after the children left, I sat alone in the kitchen. The clock ticked softly. The cake sat half-eaten on the counter. I thought about the journey, the quiet motel room, the forged signature, the lock that once kept me out. All of it had led me here, back at my table, with my life still mine. I knew things would never be perfect. Scars don't vanish. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. But I had found something even stronger than reconciliation. I had found myself again. I poured a cup of tea, the steam rising into the night. For years, I had poured everything into everyone else, my patients, my husband, my son. And somewhere along the way, I forgot to pour into me. Now, in the quiet of my own home, I finally did. I read books. I tended roses. I baked cakes. I laughed with my sister Ruth on long phone calls. Life became mine again. Sometimes when the house is still, I hear Frank's voice. Not a ghost, but a memory. Margaret, you're stronger than you think. And he's right. I am. The betrayal had cut deep, but the healing grew deeper. The house still stands. The roses still bloom. And I still belong. As I set down my teacup, I look straight into the silence. And I ask you, if the people you love most turned the key against you, would you fight to reclaim your place, or would you walk away forever? Summer turned into fall. The air grew crisp, leaves scattered across the porch, where I once stood locked out. Now I opened that same door freely. No fear, no hesitation. Inside, the house had changed. Not in its walls or its furniture, but in its spirit. It no longer carried the echo of betrayal. It carried the quiet hum of resilience. Some mornings I still woke with a heaviness, a flicker of memory, the forged signature, the laughter from that restaurant photo, the moment my son avoided my eyes. But then, I would step outside and the roses would remind me, things can be cut, wounded, but still bloom again. David came by more often now, sometimes alone, sometimes with the kids. He never asked for the house again. Instead, he asked for time. Can I fix the fence, Mom? Can I mow the lawn for you? I let him. Not because I needed it, but because he did. One afternoon, I found him kneeling in the garden. Emma and Noah played by the swing set. He looked up at me, soil on his hands. Dad used to do this, didn't he? I nodded. Yes. He said roses are like family. You tend them with care, or they wither. David's eyes filled. Then I failed, Mom. I let her twist me. I let her make me believe. His voice broke. I almost lost you. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You did lose me, David, for a time, but here we are. And now you have the chance to tend again. He looked at me then, as if he were 10 years old again, scraped knee, waiting for me to fix it. And maybe in that moment, he remembered the mother I had always been. Nights were quieter now. I no longer sat by the phone, waiting for an invitation that never came. Instead, I lit a single candle. I brewed tea, and I wrote in my journal. Page after page, I poured out the story. Not for pity, not for revenge, but so I would never forget. Because forgetting is how erasure begins. One entry read, they thought I was invisible, but my name, my life, still burns bright. Ink is stronger than lies. In November, my sister Ruth visited. She hugged me tightly at the doorway. I saw what they tried to do, Margaret. You didn't deserve that. I smiled faintly. Maybe I did deserve one thing, to finally stand up for myself. We sat by the fire, two old women laughing about childhood mischief. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like a sister, not just a mother defined by others' needs. As winter approached, I decorated the house for Christmas. Emma and Noah hung ornaments, their small hands careful with fragile glass. I placed Frank's photo on the mantel, a sprig of holly beside it, and I whispered, Merry Christmas, love. We kept the home warm, even through the coldest storm. That evening, when everyone left, I stood alone by the tree. The lights blinked softly. The house glowed with quiet pride, and I realized something. This home was no longer a place, I feared losing. It was a place I had finally reclaimed. But even in peace, question lingered. If betrayal can come from the ones who share your blood, then what truly makes a family? Is it the name? The house? The memories? Or is it the choice day after day to tend each other like roses in a garden, deliberate, careful, and true? I don't know the answer yet, but I know this. My roots run deep, my petals still open, and I am not done blooming. Winter's snow fell heavy that year. The garden lay quiet, the roses sleeping beneath frost. Inside, I thought the storm of my life had passed. I thought the worst was behind me. But storms, they have a way of circling back. One afternoon, I went to the attic. Dust filled the air. The wooden boards creaked under my steps. I searched for old ornaments, boxes of Frank's things. But what I found was something I didn't expect. Tucked in a corner, beneath a stack of yellowed blankets, was a small locked box, Frank's initials carved on top. I hadn't seen it in years. My hands trembled as I carried it down. With a screwdriver, I pried it open. The metal groaned and the lid lifted. Inside, papers, letters, and one envelope, addressed not to me, but to David. My breath caught. The handwriting was Frank's. Bold. Familiar. I opened it slowly. Inside, a letter. David, if you are reading this, your mother has given you everything she can. I leave this house in her name first, but one day, it will be yours. Take care of it. Take care of her. The words blurred through my tears. Frank. He had written this before he passed. Not legal, not binding, but a promise. A promise David never should have seen. I searched the box further. Receipts, notes, and then my stomach turned cold. Another envelope. Opened. Its contents missing. But the handwriting. On the front was clear. To Margaret. My name. My letter. Gone. Suddenly the puzzle pieces clicked. How had she, my daughter-in-law, known so much? How had she twisted David so easily? She must have found this box. Read Frank's words. Hidden mine. Turned his promise into a weapon. I sank into the chair, the letter shaking in my hands. Frank had meant for this house to hold both memory and future, but his words had been stolen. Used against me. That evening, David came by. I handed him the letter. His face paled. I never saw this, Mom. She showed me something else. She said Dad wanted everything in my name. She told me you agreed. His voice cracked. Oh, God. She must have taken your letter. Silence wrapped around us. The truth, sharp and cruel, finally laid bare. It wasn't just forged papers. It wasn't just lies whispered in his ear. It was Frank's words, twisted, stolen, turned into chains. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I wanted to scream, to rage, but instead I breathed. Slow, steady, because fury wouldn't bring the letter back, but clarity could. David, I said, your father wanted two things. For me, to keep this home, and for you to take care of me, not the house, me. Tears rolled down his face. I failed both. I placed my hand on his. Then start now. Don't fail again. For the first time, his grip was strong, steady. Not the grip of a boiled astray by someone else's greed, but the grip of a man finally owning his truth. That night after he left, I sat by the fire. The letter rested in my lap. Frank's voice echoed in my mind. Take care of it. Take care of her. And I realized I had been so focused on keeping the house, I nearly forgot to take care of me. The roses would bloom again in spring. David might heal, the children might return with laughter, but none of it mattered if I didn't choose myself. First, I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the box, then locked it away. The house was safe. The truth was safe. And for the first time, so was I. As the fire crackled, I whispered into the night. They tried to steal my past. They tried to chain my future, but my present, that belongs to me. And now I ask you, if someone twisted the words of the person you loved most and used them against you, would you let their betrayal define the rest of your story, or would you write a new ending with your own hand? The fire burned low in the hearth. Frank's letter sat folded on my lap, its edges worn with my touch. I had the truth now. But the truth didn't make the choice for me. What do you do when betrayal runs through your own blood? The next morning, a knock sounded at the door. I hesitated, my hand hovering above the knob. When I opened it, David stood there, eyes swollen. Voice low. "Mom, I need to talk." I let him in. We sat across the kitchen table, the same table where years ago he spilled cereal and laughed at cartoons. Now he couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom," he whispered, "she's gone for good. And I don't blame her for leaving. I blame myself. I let her take everything good in me and turn it into something ugly." His hands shook. "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I don't want to lose you." I looked at him, searching his face, the lines of guilt, the shadows of regret. He was my son, but he was also the man who stood silent while I was locked out of my own home. My voice was steady. "David, forgiveness isn't a gift I can hand over like a set of house keys. It's something you have to earn, day by day, choice by choice." He nodded, tears spilling. "I'll try. I'll spend the rest of my life trying." For a moment, I almost softened. Almost. But then my mind flashed to that night on the porch, my useless keys cutting into my palm, the door shutting in my face. The ache returned. I rose from my chair, walked to the window. The garden stretched out beyond the glass, Frank's roses buried under snow. "David," I said quietly, "you will always be my son. But being my son doesn't give you the right to break me." He flinched. His breath caught. I turned back, finally meeting his eyes. "If you want a place in my life again, you'll have to build it yourself, from nothing, like I had to rebuild mine when you abandoned me." He buried his face in his hands. The sound of his sobs echoed in the quiet kitchen, and for the first time, I didn't reach across to comfort him. Because this wasn't about me healing him. This was about him learning to heal the damage he caused. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were red, but clearer than before. "Then that's what I'll do, Mom, even if it takes a lifetime." He stood, paused at the doorway. "Thank you for not giving up on me entirely." And then he was gone. The silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was mine. That night I wrote in my journal, "Forgiveness isn't a door that swings open, it's a garden gate, and only those who tend it with care may step inside." The days that followed were quiet. Sometimes David called, sometimes he didn't. And each time the phone rang, I decided anew whether to answer. Because my choice was finally back in my hands. One evening, I lit a candle by Frank's photo, the Saye. Almost took everything, love. But I kept what mattered. And I learned something too. Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who proves they deserve your trust. The candle flickered, the flame steady like my own heart. And so now I ask you, If the child you raised betrayed you in the deepest way, but came back in tears, would you open the gate again or keep it closed forever? Spring arrived, the snow melted, and the roses began to bloom again. I stood in the garden, the morning sun warming my shoulders. The same roses Frank once tended, cut back, scarred, yet blooming stronger each year. I saw myself in them. Inside the size house, life felt lighter. The shadows had thinned. The silence no longer echoed with betrayal. Now it hummed with resilience. David still called. Sometimes he came by, helping with the garden, fixing the creaky porch steps. We didn't speak of forgiveness outright, but every nail he hammered, every rose he watered was his way of asking, and every time I let him through the door was my way of answering. One Sunday afternoon, Emma and Noah raced through the hallway, their laughter spilling into every corner. I baked the lemon cake again, this time not as a symbol of rejection, but of renewal. The smell filled the house, and for once, the sweetness wasn't bitter. Later that evening, after everyone left, I sat alone in the kitchen. I ran my hands across the wooden table, the table where Frank and I once dreamed, where betrayal once tried to erase me. Now it felt solid again, mine again. I lit a candle by Frank's photo. His steady smile watched me. They tried to take it all, love, I whispered. But I learned something. You don't survive betrayal by holding on to the pain. You survive by choosing what to let bloom. Tears slipped down my cheeks. Not of grief this time, of release. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. That night, I wrote the last entry in my journal. Retirement didn't begin with freedom. It began with loss. But from the ashes of betrayal grew stronger roots. This home is mine. My life is mine, and my story belongs to me again. I closed the book, placed it gently on the shelf. Then I opened the front door. The evening air rushed in, cool, fresh, alive. For the first time in months, I stepped outside without fear of being locked out. Because now, no one could take my place away. From me. I walked through the garden, my hand brushing the roses. Their thorns pricked lightly against my skin, a reminder that even beauty comes with scars, and that was all right. Scars meant survival. As I stood beneath the open sky, the stars blinked. Awake. The night wrapped around me, gentle and vast. And I realized freedom wasn't about the house. It wasn't even about David's apology. It was about me, choosing to exist fully, without apology, without erasure. I lifted my face to the stars and whispered, I am still here, and I am free. And now I turn to you. When the locks are changed, when the papers are forged, when the very people you love try to erase you, do you fight for the home or do you fight for yourself? Spring deepened into summer. The roses bloomed fuller this year, their colors richer, their fragrance sweeter. I often wondered if it was me who had changed, or the garden itself. My days were slower now. Morning coffee on the porch, afternoons tending roses, evenings with a book, or quiet calls with Ruth. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It was a sanctuary again. David visited more often, not with excuses, not with apologies, just with presence. One Saturday, he painted the back fence. Emma and Noah splattered more, paint on themselves than on the wood. Their laughter rang through the yard, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own family. Yet, some nights I still woke suddenly. The sound of a lock clicking in my dreams, the sting of betrayal pressing heavy on my chest. I would sit by the window, watching the moonlight on the roses, and whisper to myself, "You're safe. You're still here. No, One can take that away again. One evening, David knocked softly. He carried a small box in his hands. "Mom," he said, "I found this in the garage. It's yours." I opened it slowly. Inside were photographs, old albums I thought were lost, pictures of Frank and me on our wedding day, David as a boy, grinning with ice cream on his chin, family birthdays, holidays, moments I thought had been erased. Tears welled in my eyes. I held a photo of little David, his smile so bright, his arms wrapped around my neck. "How could that boy," I whispered, "grow into a man who forgot me?" David's eyes lowered. "Because I let someone else tell me who I was, and I forgot who you were." For a long moment, the silence hung heavy. Then I placed the photo back in the box. "You can't erase the past, David, but you can choose what you build from it." He nodded, his eyes glistening. That summer, Emma asked me something unexpected. "Grandma, will you teach me how to grow roses, like you and Grandpa used to?" Her small hands tugged at mine, hope shining in her eyes. I knelt in the soil beside her, placing a tiny shovel in her grip. "Yes, Emma, I'll teach you everything I know." Together we planted new bushes, fresh roots, fresh life. And as we worked, I realized something. The house wasn't just mine anymore. It wasn't just Frank's legacy. It was a lesson, a story, a reminder of resilience that I could pass on. One evening, as twilight painted the sky, I sat with Emma and Noah on the porch. "Grandma," Noah asked, "why do you love this house so much?" I smiled softly. "Because it reminds me that even when people try to take away your place, you can still fight for it. And when you win it back, it means more than ever before." The children listened, eyes wide, maybe too young to understand fully. But one day, they would. Later that night, I wrote again in my journal. "This house once held betrayal. Now it holds lessons. And one day my grandchildren will know, not just the pain, but the strength that followed." I closed the book, blew out the candle. The room fell into darkness, but inside, I felt light. And so I ask you, when betrayal scars your home, do you cling to the wound forever, or do you turn it into a story that gives strength to those who come after you? The years slipped quietly by. One season folded into another. Springs of roses, summers of laughter, autumns of golden leaves, winters of gentle stillness. And through them all, the house remained. Not just a building, a witness, a keeper of my story. Now, I sit by the window, a shawl wrapped around my shoulders, the evening light spilling across the floor. The roses bloom once again outside, their petals soft, their roots deep. I am older, slower, but not broken, never broken. David visits often now. He brings Emma and Noah, their voices filling the halls. Sometimes I see in his eyes the weight of regret that still lingers, and I tell him, regret can't rebuild the past, but love can build the future. He smiles faintly, and I know he understands. At night, I read through my old journals, page after page of pain, of betrayal, of survival. I trace the ink with my fingers, remembering the woman who wrote them. A woman who nearly lost everything, but refused to vanish. I keep Frank's letter close. The words faded now, but still clear. Take care of it. Take care of her. I whisper back, I did, love. I kept the home. I kept myself. One morning, Emma joins me in the garden. Her hands, no longer small, but steady, confident. Grandma, she says, I'll keep the roses blooming, I promise. I look at her, the sunlight catching in her hair, and I feel the circle complete. The house, the roses, the lessons, they will outlive me. As evening falls, I sit in my favorite chair, watching the shadows lengthen. I close my eyes, not in sorrow, but in peace. Because my story, once nearly erased, now stands written, in roses, in journals, in the hearts of those who remain. I take one last breath of the garden air, sweet with blossoms, and I smile. Not because betrayal never happened, but because I chose what defined me. Not their lies, not their greed, but my strength. And so now I leave you with this. When your life nears its quiet end, and you look back on all the wounds, all the scars, will you see only what was taken, or will you see what you chose to keep? The roses. Bloom, the house stands, and I am free.